We're going to drill down in this episode, an all-new episode of Canzano and Wilner. Thank you for watching this. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Subscribe and like, as the kids say. I'm Jon Canzano. You can find my work at joncanzano.com. He is Jon Wilner. You can find him at wilnerhotline.com. We're going to talk about UNLV. We're going to talk about Texas State. We're going to talk about Pac-12 media rights. Wilner, where do we want to start on this?
Let's start on the course.
Okay.
What have you been doing this week? You've been a busy guy.
Yeah, we put on a charity golf tournament. We have a small nonprofit. You know, you and I both know this. We do a lot of stuff that doesn't matter in media. Okay, and ultimately it doesn't.
Yep.
It feels important, life or death, day to day.
Right.
But not in 2009, we founded the Bald Face Truth Foundation. We put on Camp Exceptional in the summers. We've talked about that camp on this videocast podcast.
Yep.
But in order to fund the camp, we hold a charity golf tournament, a celebrity golf tournament every year. And so we really rely upon a lot of former Pac-12 players that play in this thing, and certainly former NBA players in the Portland market, Major League Baseball players, stuff like that, former NFL players. But we had our charity golf tournament yesterday. I got a little bit of sun. I was out on the course. It's fine.
Yes, you did.
It's like putting on a wedding, Wilner. Like when you get out there, like, you know, I notice all the things that are wrong because we're in the middle of it, but you just want to make sure people have food and drink.
Yep.
And they're having a good time and the sponsors are there, but it was a big success, and I got to hit a few shots.
How'd you hit them?
I'm not a very good golfer.
No.
I don't have that kind of time.
Like, give us a taste for what celebrities participate.
Well, this was a cool one because Oregon and Oregon State fans will love this. But Oregon had a defensive back years ago named Ifo Ekpre.
Oh, yeah. Really
he was a bona fide first-round NFL draft pick. I mean, he was headed in that direction. And people may remember his last year at Oregon, late in the year, he tore his ACL and ended up, not being drafted in the first round. It was a big blow to his career. He is now working with kids. He reached out. He's like, can I play in this event? Great. He was out there. Ryan Nall, remember him at running back for Oregon State? Big Oregon State great. He's out there. He's played a few years in the NFL, but is now working the civilian life, selling houses. He volunteers his time and plays. Bobby Gross, 1977 Blazers championship team, was out there playing. Mike Walter, former 49er linebacker, 3-time Super Bowl champion, Oregon Duck. He was out there playing. A whole bunch of other, local celebrities as well, like, TV newscasters, meteorologists, friends of this podcast, more or less. We should get Jon Wilner because this is how it works. You play as a fivesome. Okay. And the foursome, they make donations to increase their draft order. So there's a draft. And so Wilner, I think that there would be some viewers of the show that would maybe donate to the BFT Foundation in order to move up in the draft and pick you so they can pick your brain for a few hours on the course.
I think I would probably be Mr. Irrelevant in that draft.
There is no Mr. Irrelevant in this draft. Every last pick's making money for the charity. So we love the last pick too. I'm secretly, not so secretly glad it's over because it is like throwing a wedding. I mean,
it was nice of the Pac-12 to not, hit you with major news on Wednesday when you were out on the course. I kind of suspected that would be the case because that's always what happens, right?
Yeah. I had my laptop. I'm not going to lie. I'm riding around on the cart with a laptop, but I did reach out on Wednesday morning and I said, hey, to a couple of sources. I said, hey, anything happening today? And they said no news Wednesday, no news Thursday.
Okay.
That pointed me to Friday. I don't know. I'm a conspiracy theorist maybe, but it pointed me to Friday and beyond. Where it feels like they're close on media rights, maybe closer there, and then expansion. What's your feeling on the Pac-12?
And I think it could happen anytime, right? We're in that window where it could be any day, or it could be another 10 days, 2 weeks. I agree. I think that the media rights deal is going to happen first. It's possible media rights and expansion would be announced at the same time, but I would bet against that. I think we're going to get a little bit of a lag in between the two. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Friday. There's a lot of big news has happened on Friday in the last month or two. But yeah, any time, that's the funny thing is you go through months and months of these negotiations, right? And you're talking about tens of millions of dollars and multiple networks and all that. And sometimes it can just be one thing. that is holding you up for days because of lawyers or what the networks need to do. And I think that's where they are. It's like just they got to dot some I's and cross a few T's, and that could happen on Friday, could happen next week. Before June 1st, or July 1st, I would bet on media rights.
To your point, when Oregon State, Washington State were announcing the 2025 deal, they were set to make the announcement, and then they ran into kind of some conflicts with, like, do we announce this because there's major events going on sporting wise nationally? Do we want to get overshadowed by that? And then in the 11th hour, it was ESPN, as people know, got that Friday night game with Houston and Oregon State.
Yep.
That they wanted it next season, and it was agreed upon. ESPN said, we wanted it to be a Friday night game. Oregon State said, we're good with that. Houston said, we're good with that. Oregon State signed the contract. Houston hadn't yet signed the contract. Now, you don't know if, like, some deputy AD is on vacation or just has meetings, but it dragged out over several days, and it kept prolonging the entire announcement of the deal because I knew it was done, and I knew that this was the thing that was holding it up. And yet it felt like it almost took a week to get that signature from Houston, which was a formality.
Yep. Could be this similar thing here. A little bit more involved in terms of the hands in the kitchen type thing. But because I think it's going to be multiple networks, right? That always adds a layer. It's two things, multiple networks and a new deal, right? We saw how this whole thing has played out over the last few years. And if it's a new deal, it's much more complicated than if you're just extending an agreement that already exists.
I had a source tell me that when this got announced, that the flagship or the cornerstone partner might be announced first. Do you see a logic in announcing it that way, rolling it out, going, hey, X network is going to be our primary partner for 2026. Here are some of the details. And then in subsequent days, rolling out the other parts? Or do you put the whole thing out at once?
I'd probably prefer, if I'm them, to put the whole thing out at once. But, if you've got something and everything else is taking a while, I would probably lean towards getting it out. I don't know that matters. I don't know that any of it matters in this way. There's going to be a deal, right? There's not, could the whole thing blow apart kind of thing that we saw with the Pac-12 a few years ago. They're going to have a deal. We know the basics of the partners. We have a pretty good idea of what the dollar range is going to be. There's not as much drama to me. And so, when it happens, it happens. I'm much more curious about the expansion piece because there's going to be a media deal. We know that. This is this is not a crisis, live or die crisis like we saw a few years ago.
But I understand why fans are a little scarred by that. And there's a little PTSD from that because, when you look on social media, it's people going, oh, this is just the same as it was 2 years ago. Oh, it's just punting, The truth is, a decade ago, we never even knew these deals were being negotiated. They got announced and we went, oh, here's the new TV deal. Now we're so much more tuned into the day-to-day of this, the negotiation of this, the dollar figures on media deals. I'm curious to see, in talking with a number of these schools in the conference, they all seem to say exposure is more important than the bottom line. Now, unless the money really is a difference maker, you go for the exposure piece, you go for a true partner.
Yep.
You did some drilling into that, like what these numbers could look like. Do you see that balance in this? Do you see them striving towards exposure over revenue?
I think so. I mean, I think that their initial revenue projections were maybe a little rosy. It seems to me, sources I've talked to the last couple months, not on the campuses, but in the media world, on the network side, they all feel like it's going to be in the $7 million to $10 million range per school per year. And then it will, but that will then kind of shake out based on the revenue share that the last member gets, right? They've got to add one more school. If that school comes in at 50% revenue share, that affects everybody else's. But I would be pretty surprised if it's not somewhere in the 7.5, 8.5 million per school per year. Much lower than that, not great. Higher than that, really, hey, good for them. What do you think?
I think there's a way, like they're always looking for a win in the PR world, right? And they're going to sell exposure as hey, we were after exposure, no matter what this number is. But I think you're right in that, let's just say, and we're going to get to Texas State and UNLV, but let's say that 9th overall member, the 8th football member is coming in at, a 0 distribution in year 1 and then a full distribution in year 2. You can make the numbers look better and say, hey, look, our initial distribution is 10.5 million, 11 million per school, but really it ends up more like around 9 when you look at the totality of the deal. But so I think there's a piece of that is going on. Also, let's not forget that the Pac-12 Enterprises piece of this has the potential to make this deal look a little better on paper than maybe some of the other deals, because the Pac-12 Enterprises could come in if that primary partner is using them as the production arm. Where does that money get slid? Where's the revenue versus expenses? You can make this look better than it really is. So I'm really curious as we unpack this when this deal gets announced to find out, is the side hustle that is Pac-12 Enterprises ultimately going to push this deal more towards the 10 million mark than maybe the 7 million mark, and how that will go. Do you have a sense on who that cornerstone partner could be, Wilner? I mean, I've done a lot of thinking from a basketball standpoint, and ESPN's relationship with Boise State and Gonzaga is interesting. Yes. The CW has been there all along, but I don't really see them as a cornerstone long-term partner unless they're really willing to grow. What do you think?
Well, it depends. I kind of think it depends a little on how you would define cornerstone. To me, I think you can make the case that the cornerstone partner is the network that's going to provide your football product with the most over-the-air linear exposure, right? And if they've got a package of games, let's say it's 15 to 18 games on the CW, 100 million households, to me, then they become your cornerstone partner. But then at the same time, if ESPN's got a ton of secondary games and a lot of your basketball, you could argue that it would be ESPN as your cornerstone. I think it may depend on how you define it. But to me, the biggest thing is how many games are going to be on linear television, either cable or over the air over the course of a 14-week season. I think that to me is the biggest thing, and a bigger deal, frankly, than the exact number. Whether it's 8 or 9 million, it's all on the margins, because the Big 12 is at 30 and the ACC is at 40, and the SEC and Big 10 are a different stratosphere. It's not going to affect the competitive balance relative to those conferences, whether the Pac-12 gets 8 million a school or 10 million a school, right? It may help against the American Conference, the Mountain West, Sun Belt, but if they're judging themselves against the Power Four, then the exact dollar figure to me doesn't matter as much as the exposure. That's what they've got to have if they want to be considered like almost a group of one in between the Power Four and the group of five. If they want that middle slot to themselves, they got to have a bunch of linear exposure.
Well, I think they would probably push back against saying in that middle spot. I think they want to be number 5. I mean, they said.
Well, that's what I mean. I didn't say.
I know you mean that, but I think when they watch this, they're going to be like, "What are you saying in the middle? We're the 5th best conference, clearly." Exactly. And they'll spin it that way. But you're right on the money, and it kind of dovetails us right into a thought that Chris Standiford, the Gonzaga AD, I was sitting in his office. He said to me, I said, "What are you looking for in the media deal?" He said, "We're looking for a partner."
Yeah.
He said, "We're looking for somebody who really wants to be our partner." He didn't say, "We're looking for maximum revenue. We want the top dollars going to win this thing." So they're looking for a partner there. And then it leads us into expansion because, we got that feedback very early on. We talked about it on this podcast that there wasn't a school that just stood out as the next addition. There wasn't a no-brainer. And a lot of these expansion decisions, Texas and Oklahoma, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, they're no-brainer decisions. This one isn't for the Pac-12. We're starting to get down the food chain, and we're starting to see like, hey, Texas State has all this upside and this potential, and they're super ambitious. UNLV, the geography fits, but maybe lukewarm on joining the Pac-12. Memphis, really nice brand, football and basketball. It could be a nice addition if you really just talking on the field and on the court, but there's a travel expense. And gosh, when you look at the numbers, do they justify bringing them in? And it's another mouth to feed, and there's travel. So I think lately it's all been about Texas State. And we've talked about this, but what are you feeling about the Pac-12 and Texas State?
Well, I think that that's the top target and should be the top target. On a bigger scale, they have to take care about the competitive value. And I think that that's really important. They want a school that wants to win, that is willing to invest and that wants to win, because they are, and getting back to what we just talked about, right? They're looking at themselves as kind of group of one. They're not Power Four. They're above the group of five. They're in that slot. And to get there and maintain that, you've got to have your floor's got to be as high as possible. And so they're going to do everything they can with expansion, with scheduling, with the media deal, with revenue distribution, to create as high a floor as they can, because that will have a compounding effect on strength of schedule for football and basketball, which will impact access to the postseason. So I think that they think Texas State is in to win. And, I'm not sure that they necessarily think that about UNLV in the same way. UNLV, they're looking at 2030, which is fine. But if the Pac-12 is saying, all right, which school wants to win in football and is willing to do what it takes and is financially stable enough to do what it takes, I think they may decide Texas State's the play.
They already invited UNLV, and UNLV said, no, we're going to go to the mountain. We're staying in the Mountain West. But I also think UNLV and the boosters around UNLV have a inflated sense of what they are. They're playing in an NFL stadium. They just hired big time coaches in their major sports. They feel like they're positioning themselves to be a Power Four member. That invitation may never come, but they're probably asking themselves, hey, are we better off in the Pac-12, or can we get that invite from where we are?
Well, that's the thing. Exactly. Yeah. And I think they're making a mistake if they think the Mountain West is a better platform for getting into the Power Four in the 2030s. I think the Pac-12 is a better platform precisely because of the competitive floor. I think it's going to be lower in the Mountain West. And we're seeing what's going on right now with the CFP, and we could talk about it later in more detail. Yeah. But the CFP, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC and SEC, they are focused on strength of schedule. They even brought in a mathematician from Google to help them create a new strength of schedule metric, and that is going to exist for all the conferences with the bids in whatever shape the CFP takes. Strength of schedule is going to be a big, big deal. And I think you're better off being in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I think your Mountain West champion is not going to outrank your Pac-12 champion. And you got a problem there. Even if you win that conference, you've got a problem trying to get access to the CFP. Memphis and Tulane may think the same thing. They may arrive at the same point in the American. It's why I think we've heard these discussions and these murmurs about football only. Could Memphis play everything else in the Big East, but play football only in the Pac-12? I think that has been talked about. I know that's been talked about in the Pac-12 meetings.
You think that's a good idea?
I don't think the Pac-12 needs them, but I think if I'm Memphis, I would think hard about it, because I think you could win the American and be a one-loss conference champion, and you're outranked by the Pac-12 champion, and you're not in the playoff. I just think there's only going to be one spot, I think, that is in most years guaranteed for the group of six. And I think the Pac-12 champion is positioned to get it.
I do too. If I'm one of those schools, I want to be where Boise is, because Boise is essentially the flagship school outside of the Power Four and Notre Dame. Boise is the biggest draw and has the best reputation, and I want to be with them. Just like in basketball, I'd want to be with Gonzaga, right? And I think that's where the core strength of the rebuilt Pac-12 lies in the fact that they've got Boise football and Gonzaga basketball.
Yeah. And everybody keeps asking me, they keep saying, okay, if the media numbers in the Pac-12 are not clearly better than the numbers in the American, what's the sell to Memphis? And I'm like, the sell is you could compete and have a great football season and win your conference and be 11-1 and be Memphis. And you're looking over at Boise or, whoever wins the Pac-12 going, gosh, we're 2 spots behind them in the CFP rankings. Like, we can't get in front of them no matter what you do because of the strength of your conference. So I think there's a real strong consideration there, and I do think it's sort of the equivalent of consolidation that we've seen in some of these other conferences. There's a bottom of the Big Ten, there's a bottom of the SEC.
Yeah.
But, you don't want to be in a position where you're at the top of your conference and you can't get into the playoff, and it sort of defeats the overall mission. So I think if the Pac-12 could have its wish, they get Texas State at a reduced distribution in the early years, makes the numbers look good on paper. Hey, we're getting a bigger number up front.
Yep.
And we feel good about their ambition. This is a school that's got an enrollment of 40,000. They're trying to be an R1 research university. They are talking and, they're shooting for the moon. They may hit a lamppost, but they're shooting for the moon. And so they're doing all the right things. And then, hey, by the way, from a football-only perspective and to help with scheduling, we're adding Memphis as well in football. That's a pretty good conference. I think that would be a big win for the Pac-12 if you could get into that position.
Would you add Memphis as football only and keep it there, or would you try to add, say, Tulane and USF as football onlys?
It would depend on the numbers. What does that do to your What does that do to your media rights? Am I starting to dilute the conference at all? I don't think you need Tulane in South Florida. I think you need, and I heard from the beginning, Scott Barnes, the athletic director at Oregon State, he said lean and mean.
Yeah.
Right. He didn't want to get too big. Some of these conferences, when you talk about 16 or 18 teams, you start to get so big you can't govern. And so, and I think from a scheduling perspective in football, there's a number. From a basketball scheduling perspective, there's a number. And I think, those numbers are right around 9 and 10, 8 and 10, something like that. And then you're okay. I also am looking at the way Oregon State and Washington State have scheduled in future years. And it looks to me like they're lining up 4 non-conference games for future years. So I think they're trying to, make some contingencies long-term. But, I also communicated a little bit with the president at Texas State. I find him to be, a breath of fresh air. He's got a lot of pep, a lot of moxie. You've seen him on social media. I think he brings a little personality to the conference. I think he's not afraid to, try to punch above his weight a little bit.
Which other presidents might think is a good thing, or they might think is a bad thing.
Well, there was some, the Pac-12 presidents got upset in the last week when all the Texas State stuff got out. And I was told that there was some scolding in their meeting about, hey, they think the ADs are speaking out of school a little bit. I don't know how you could blame the ADs. They're out trying to talk to media and sell their story and raise money, NIL, and, talk about their universities. They're talking to donors and fans and ticket holders constantly in these meetings. I mean, at some point you have to allow the ADs to kind of go out and do their jobs. And so I think, the job of a president, of course, they're worried about, enrollment and commitments, and deans and managing their budget on their own campus. But the athletic directors right now, with the House settlement and everything that's going on, they've got a really difficult job. I think it's one of the hardest jobs, in a university setting.
No doubt. It's crazy that we are talking about this. We're 1 month shy of 4 years from the date Texas and Oklahoma, the news broke that they were leaving for the SEC. And this whole realignment wave, it's the same realignment wave, and it's hit the Big West, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks. It has taken 4 years to play out across the country. Wow. I think that is crazy. And by the time this thing ends, the next one is going to be starting to swell, right? I mean, because we know that there's one coming at the end of this decade, and the foundation for that's going to take hold in 27, 28. I just think it's nuts. 4 years we've been talking about this.
Yeah. And I think, look, I keep saying, like, waiting for there to be an end to it, Wilner. I think this will get done for the Pac-12, and then the conversation will pivot to what's happening in 2030.
Yeah.
What's happening beyond this current media deal? Because this whole conference, this Pac-12 conference, it's a stepping stone conference. It's designed to, hey, you want to be part of the haves? Join this conference,
right?
Because it could be it's the stepping stone for you to get to wherever this is all headed,
right? And audition, absolutely. Yeah. The ACC and Big 12 schools are auditioning to try to get in the SEC and Big 10, and the Pac-12 schools and the American schools in Mountain West, they're auditioning to try to get into the ACC or the Big 12 or whatever kind of takes shape next. Everybody is trying to move up except for the 34 that are in the SEC and Big 10. And even there, the bottom half of that 34, those schools need to be a little bit worried too about what's coming next in a few years. It's just constant striving and backfilling in college athletics. It's bananas. It's great content, but it's bananas.
A little bit on the CFP front. It looks like they are wadding up the 5+11, the automatic thing. Nobody seems happy with any of it. Are they starting over, really?
Think that they're going to kind of start over, not back to square one necessarily, but maybe square 1.5. So that's what came out of the meetings this week. Multiple reports that the Big 10 and the SEC could not agree. They have competing preferences and models, couldn't agree. So everybody's going to basically take a step back and retrench. They do have a deadline. I think it's December 1st. They got to tell ESPN what the format is going to be for the 2026 season. So we're talking about 5 months. They got to get this thing figured out. And that means that the SEC and Big 10 have got to reach an agreement, whether it's 12, 14, or 16, whether it's based on automatic qualifiers or at larges. They got to find common ground somehow. And what makes it complicated is that the regular season structure is affecting everybody. How many conference games is the SEC going to stay at 8 or move to 9? The Big 10's at 9. Are they going to have a crossover series? Are they going to have play-in games on championship weekend? It's like 5-dimensional chess with these two conferences, and that just tells you what college sports is all about right now. The fact that there's stagnation is a good thing in a way, because the 12-team playoff is pretty darn good, and a lot of people are worried it's going to get ruined if they go to 16 and do some different type of model.
I'll tell you what, I see some beauty in what's going on, because what you don't want, if you are somebody who values the larger picture in the ecosystem, you don't want the Big 10 and the SEC unified and working against everybody else. You never win that. I, for the first time, saw these two entities sort of stand in a little opposition. And you're hearing some coaches in the Big 10 start to bellyache, hey, they're only playing 8 conference games over there. How can they say they're better than us? Of course, we want to play them. But if they're only playing 8 conference games and we're doing crossovers, this is not apples to apples. If I'm the Big 12 and the ACC in particular, I look at that and I see a little bit of crack there in the unified front of the Big 2, because if you can keep them at odds and you can kind of level the system out a little bit, maybe you find a path to sort of settle things down, because it looked for a while like the SEC and the Big 10 were just going to bulldoze ahead and take the automatic qualifiers. It doesn't appear to be working that way. I like that they're at odds. I think it's good for the system. Let them fight it out, and let's see what everybody else can end up with.
And we should, before we wrap up, kind of bring this thing full circle. There's a complete correlation, direct correlation between what happens between the SEC and the Big 10 with the CFP and the Pac-12, their football strategy, right? Because the model that for the CFP will help is intertwined with regular season scheduling. And if those two create crossovers, if the SEC goes to 9 games and they create a crossover series, there's going to be fewer non-conference games against Power 4 opponents available. And that will affect how the Pac-12 goes about scheduling. So then they've got to start thinking, well, do we want 9 or 10 for football? Because then we're less reliant on non-conference games. It all fits together in this giant puzzle. And the Pac-12 it can't separate out the membership from all the football strategic decisions either. It's all intertwined.
Yeah.
And it all is related to what's going on with the SEC and Big Ten, which is why it's so interesting, but also it's hard to get answers, and it's hard for the Pac-12 to determine its course of action because it is some ways dependent upon what happens at the very top of the food chain.
Yeah, and for people who are underwhelmed at the idea of the Pac-12 taking Texas State as a possibility for school number 9 and football member number 8, they have to pick somebody,
right?
And they have to make a choice here. And if UNLV is not, a viable option, and Memphis and Tulane present a financial obstacle, Texas State might be it. It might be, this is the best, most logical bottom line choice. Of course, you don't need them to get into Texas. Boise State had Ashton Genty, right? But it may help you get into Texas in a way that you hadn't been before. And it may just be that this is the only good viable option, and you take it. You take that path for the short term. It's better than jumping on a life raft and going to the ACC if you're Cal and Stanford and getting a minimum distribution, right? A fractional distribution. It's all headed somewhere, somewhere very interesting in 2030 and beyond.
No doubt. Everybody has got flaws at this point in terms of who you're picking from. They got the schools they had to get. Yeah. They got them in September and October. So that's let's see. We've covered the basics, but who knows? We could have breaking news in a day, in 3 days, whatever. We will be back next week. Maybe we'll need an emergency episode, right?
We'll be here for you.
We'll be here. If there's big news, we will be here for you. For John Canzano, I am Jon Wilner, and we appreciate you joining us this week. Hope everyone has a great weekend. We will be back soon.
Thanks, everybody.